Good morning. Dang, I look around and I see people from really all over the globe gathered in Montana to talk about wind energy, transmission, storage. I could have used your help in 2005 when I proposed to the Montana legislature that we pass a renewable portfolio standard. Oh man, the lobbyists were running up and down the hall saying, that governor's crazy. Here we are, we got 30% of the coal in America, 10% of the coal on the planet, the best hydroelectricity dams anywhere, natural gas, oil. And he's talking about wind power. Wind power in Montana? Why, everybody knows that wind power, well, hell, that's for hippies. Living on a mountaintop, smoking marijuana, wind power. But we stayed on it like smell on a skunk. And we worked that legislature until, well, it didn't pass. You know, you'd like to say, oh, gee, everybody really agreed. In 2005, I needed 3 Republicans to vote with us. 3. I needed 3. I had to find 3. So we found 3 Republicans out of 76 to vote for an energy future in Montana. 3 Republicans out of 76. Let's go through what happened to them. One was chased out of the party. One was beaten re-election. And one's still in the legislature. Now, I'll be honest with you, right now, if we allowed it to happen, they would roll that back. In fact, in the last legislative session, I vetoed 4 bills that would have destroyed Montana's renewable portfolio standard. And I can't figure it out. $1 billion has been invested in Montana in wind energy and transmission, and they're still talking about, oh, geez, it's all about coal. Look, when I was elected governor, 2004. I look at this as being a CEO of a company. You look at your assets, you look at your liabilities, what are we globally competitive in? And look, Montana's not going to be a big manufacturing base. We're a long distance away from the market. We're a long distance back with the raw material. Even if I could attract somebody to come here with a big manufacturing plant, they would say, all right, now we need 3,000 employees to get this thing kicked off. Where the heck am I going to find a town in Montana that has 3,000 employees that are trained or could be trained for a specific factory? You can't. But in Montana, we have some natural resources. Of course, we have coal, and we know about coal. And I'm going to walk on some territory that not everybody agrees with here. But look, when you have 10% of the coal on the planet, and you're creating jobs in Montana, and the world is still using coal, I think Montana ought to be competitive in coal. We have oil, I think we ought to be competitive in oil. We have gas, we ought to be competitive. We have hydroelectricity, we ought to be competitive. And we have wind. We have some of the best wind resources in the world. In fact, Harvard University, they did a study recently. Who's here from Harvard? No, I wouldn't admit it either. So, they did a study, and they said Montana, if we ranked Montana with the rest of the states, that there's only one other state that has a capacity of producing more electricity from their wind energy than Montana. Bill Alexander, they said Texas. Texas actually has a capacity to produce more wind than Montana. Texas? Really? If you took the bullshit out of Texas, they're smaller than Rhode Island. You know that. And here we are, a state with all of that capacity, and yet in 2005, we still had not attained 1 megawatt of electricity produced from wind. While all of our neighbors, north, south, and east and west, they were developing wind energy. So we moved. With your help, we're moving faster all the time. Of course, the challenges are great. You know, this couple of years ago, I lost my father. And my father, he was a son of Montana homesteaders, and one of the brightest people I'll ever meet, and he had an 8th grade education. He was an innovator his entire life, about every business he was involved in. And so you don't really appreciate that when you're a kid. But you know, when you get to be an adult and you look at the body of work that your father's done, well, you know, you try and learn some things, because those old timers, you know, you can learn something from them. So one time, we were talking, and I said to Dad, Dad, what was the biggest change on the farm when the electricity came on those copper wires? How did it change your life? thought about it a little bit. And of course, he's German. And so he thinks about things a great deal before he says anything. I'm also half Irish, and so that's what you're getting here. So he said to me, well, it was 1948 before we got the electricity to the farm. And it came out of FDR's attempts to create an America that everybody had an equal opportunity. Because, you know, by the Great Depression, there was electricity in all the cities, in the bigger towns, but the smaller towns in those square states, and certainly the farms, they weren't electrified. And so FDR recognized if everybody's going to have an equal opportunity, the basis is to be able to have electricity. My dad was telling me this. He said, well, so it arrived in 1948, but the question is, what was the biggest change in my life? So he said, well, I suppose it was that we could weld at a little hotter temperature. They'd had a wind charger on the farm since 1928. They had electricity. They used to have a copper wire that came here. He said, well, our system was really a pretty good system. We had more wind than we could use. Sound familiar? But he said the problem always was those damn batteries. Well, we had a basement full of them, and they cost a lot of money. They only lasted a few years, and every once in a while they'd blow up. Now we are, 80 years later? We're in a room. We got the same problem. We have nearly an unlimited amount of wind power. In fact, if you can trust Harvard University, the amount of electricity they say we could produce from wind in Montana would be enough to produce all of the electricity we need to run every car, light truck, and SUV in America, plus 20%. We could run 120% of the cars in America on Montana wind if we just had the transmission and storage capacity. So that hasn't changed since 1928. That's something that the first residents of Montana recognized and capitalized. And now we've had something like 70 years, 80 years of inactivity in Washington, D.C., culminated by the last 10 years of actually less than activity. I'm so frustrated with what's happening with leadership in Washington, D.C. Look, we are in this room and we all know that we can break addiction to foreign oil with domestic energy. Your slice of the pie here is wind. But there's solar, and there's storage, and there's transmission. And yet, we apparently aren't able to do big things in this country anymore. Can you imagine if the President of the United States today was Eisenhower, and he stood before Congress and he said, I have a plan. You know how you can drive from New York to Los Angeles right now? You can already get there. But there are all these little two-lane highways, and you got to stop in all of these villages along the way, and it's slow and cumbersome. I have a plan. We're going to build a transportation system that we'll call the interstate highway system, so that if you had enough fuel, you could drive from New York to Los Angeles and back and never stop any place. He would be laughed out of Washington, D.C. if he proposed something like that. The lobbyists for all the cities would say, hell, I don't want that. By God, they'd send 1,000 lobbyists to Washington, D.C., sprinkle a bunch of money around and say, look, we like people stopping in our town and getting a little gas and buying some chips. And then, of course, the county commissioners, they'd be outraged by this, not stopping in our county. And state by state, it'd be open warfare between North Dakota and Montana, where we'd actually put that transmission system. But Eisenhower was dealing with a Congress that said, we're still building America. We have a special responsibility because we are a special country, and we lead the world. Now, I don't know, we've elected a bunch of people that say, well, you know, this leading the world's overrated. We'll allow China and Europe to get ahead of us in a new energy economy. Well, I thank you for coming to Big Sky. I thank you for being in Montana, because if they won't lead in Washington, D.C., then you can lead. You, private industry, you'll lead. And in spite of the inactivity in Washington, D.C., we can create a new energy system in the United States. Designed by you, the American engineers, built by American workers, hundreds of thousands of people that are employed and re-employed in building this energy system. a smarter energy system, one that is built on American resources, both physical and intellectually. And yet, since they're not moving in Washington, D.C., we'll move here. I thank you for being here. This entire country is depending on you and your vision for creating a new energy system. Thank you, and God bless you.